So crunches, leg raises, those kind of things, they don't make sense. And they don't make sense if you understand function. So you've got to ask yourself, what do these muscles do? And this is what's really important. Transversal, you know, if we look at this and say, okay, for simplicity's sake, we'll call these at least the anterior core muscles. Transverse abdominis, internal oblique, external oblique, rectus abdominis. The reality is they are all stabilizers. That is their primary function. And this is one of my favorite quotes, but I remember when I first read this mechanical low back pain book, I've said this before, but it was like the light bulbs coming on. I'm thinking, wow, this makes so much sense. Rather than considering the abdominals as flexors and rotators of the trunk, for which they certainly have the capacity, their function might be better viewed as anti-rotators and anti-lateral flexors of the trunk. Rather than seeing them as moving my trunk, if I see them as stabilizing my trunk, it seems to make way more sense. That's why things like, you know, the anti-rotation press, giving no credit to the man in the hallway. If you think anti-rotation press, you're lengthening the lever, you're creating a greater amount of torque, and then you're asking those rotational stabilizers to resist that torque. That's what those muscles do, right? Does anybody think that this is what your obliques do? No, it's not what they do. But this is what your obliques do. So if we think, okay, I want a more functional exercise for my obliques, then suitcase carry makes a lot of sense. Side plank makes a lot of sense. Any side plank row, side plank abduction, there's a bunch of things that you can choose that are going to challenge that muscle in its stabilizer role. There are going to be a bunch of exercises that you can choose from an anti-rotation standpoint. That's why we move from 4-point. That's why we're going to go from plank to shoulder taps. We're going to go from 4-point to 3-point, because what are we doing? As soon as we take a hand off the ground, we've now made it an anti-rotation exercise. We've applied a rotational torque that needs to be resisted. If I simply put both hands on the ground, all I'm worried about now is anti-extension. So in any of our planking variations, no matter what it is, if I have 4 points in contact, whether it's bear plank, whether it's regular plank, whether it's elbow plank, I am now using my anterior abdominal wall to help me to control extension. The moment I take one off the ground, that's why when you watch people flopping around when we're doing anti-rotation stuff, you can kind of look at that and go, that's not working. So if I'm trying to do, like if I'm thinking, you know, bear plank tap, if I can't do this, the exercise isn't working. If my ass is flopping all over the place side to side, or my shoulders are moving, I'm no longer making that an anti-rotation exercise. I think I've just made it an exercise. Okay, it's just, you know, life cereal. Some stuff you do, it's supposed to be good for you. No, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for that exercise to be a stability exercise that becomes an anti-rotation exercise because we remove one stable point, or we transfer from stable point to stable point. And it goes back, I think this is a really good, simple visualization of this core cylinder idea. In terms of what do we want to be able to do? Well, basically, we'd like to be able to keep cylinder over cylinder. And Jess was talking about this when she did her talk. I think you had the same slide. But if you think about it in that way, in terms of, okay, the pelvis is a cylinder, the rib cage is a cylinder, the idea is that they talk about that open scissors posture. I don't want those cylinders facing out. Somebody had said, if you took 2 bowls, I'm going to put one bowl over the other bowl. That's what we want. If you took the 2 bowls and then opened them up like jaws, that's what we don't want. We'd like to be able to keep that alignment. So that's really what we're working on. And then we have to realize like when you throw the PRI stuff into it, there's also a rotational component. There's also the ability of that body to move in the transverse plane. There's the ability of that body to move in the frontal plane. That's why sometimes you see these people who are walking and you kind of think, well, what happened to them? And you realize they've just fallen deeply into that kind of PRI rotational posture. And now what do you get? Well, what you get is you get a short QL on one side. You get a short hip flexor. You get, you know, a long a tighter right SCM. Like all these things are happening also as a result of the rotation. So it's not as simple as linear stability. And even rotary stability is more complex than we want to make it out to be, because we're realizing that our pelvis is rotating in two planes. It's going sort of, there's an anterior-posterior rotation, and then there's a transverse kind of translatory motion that's taking place. So it makes all this stuff important. And then what reinforces this, and I blew this up because this is really hard to see, and this, blowing it up, you lose some of this. But flexion and extension, if we look, flexion and extension, right? We have more range in flexion and extension in our lumbar spine, more range in flexion and extension in our cervical spine, meaning that we can move our head this way, and that we can move our pelvis, we can pelvic tilt, right? But when we look at axial rotation, we realize we've got a really high, like C1, C2 axial rotation component, and everything else from a rotary standpoint is fairly limited. This is why rotary stability becomes really important, because you don't have a lot of capability to rotate there. If we get down here, like you look into the lumbars, these are in the minus, less than 5. Okay, so this one, 5, everything else probably 2, 3. So meaning that the rotational capability of those joints is really limited. In the same way, if you look at lateral flexion, we don't have a ton of lateral flexion. Again, where do we have the most lateral flexion? My cervical spine. Cervical spine is really well designed to move so that I can, I guess, catch predators. So I'll see what's going to eat me before I get eaten. I don't know if it actually does any good to stop it, but you see it. And this, again, I've read this slide 1,000 times, but the overall range of lumbar rotation is approximately 13 degrees. So if we go back to here and we look at this, this adds up to 13. That's all, 13. Not a lot. The rotation between each segment from T10 to L5 is 2 degrees. The greatest rotational range is L5 to S1, which is 5 degrees. And then the thoracic spine, not the lumbar spine, should be the site of the greatest amount of rotation of the trunk. When an individual practices rotational exercises, he or she should be instructed to think about the motion occurring in the chest, right? That's why when we're doing chops and lifts, what are we doing? We're starting in half kneel. We're stabilizing their lumbar spine by being in that half kneel position. And we're literally having them think about the rotation occurring at the trunk. We're actually forcing the rotation to occur at the trunk by design. Same way here, and this is just another depiction. Ranges of motion in the lumbar spine, healthy younger men, right? So if you look, flexion, extension, lateral bend, axial rotation. Axial rotation, not much, not much, not much, not much, not much. Okay? So we don't have much rotary capability. So what does that mean? Well, it means, and this will add another layer. Rotation of the lumbar spine is more dangerous than beneficial. So any rotation of the lumbar spine, anything that we're doing, more dangerous than beneficial. I don't give a shit what their PT said. Okay, one of the problems that we run into, their PT said they're supposed to do this exercise. Try hard to talk them out of it. You can't say, I don't give a shit what your PT says. I can say that and I get away with it. You say that, they think you're a jerk. But I think there's a lot of PTs who have not accessed and digested this information and make the same bad recommendations that I was making 15 years ago. But rotation of the pelvis and lower extremities to one side while the trunk remains stable or is rotated to the other side is particularly dangerous. I always say this, emphasis on the word particularly. She didn't even say just dangerous. She added the word particularly before dangerous. So this is particularly dangerous. That means that all of this is all in the particularly dangerous category. So people should not be doing this. If you have a client who has got instructions from their physical therapist to do it and does it, okay, you may have to eat it on this one. But I still would be able to say, hey, let's try not doing that. Because the one thing, and I forget who I don't know whether I was talking to Pat, I was talking to somebody yesterday who said, you know, the big rationale is, I do it, my back feels better after I do it. And I've been doing it for 10 years. Like, if you've been doing it for 10 years, that means your back still hurts, right? So for 10 years, it hasn't been working. And the rationale that there are lots of things that feel good that are not good for you. The simplest analogy is scratching a scab. When you've got a cut and it gets itchy, you go, oh my God, I had to scratch it. And you look down and you're like, shit, I made it bleed again. And when you try to get that cut to heal, what do? You're like, I got to cover it, I got to not scratch it. Even if it's itchy, I have to leave it alone. That's lumbar spine. That's why these people have these perpetual, and I can tell you, I had perpetual back pain. Constant for years. When I stopped doing this stuff, it went away. I don't get low back pain anymore. I shouldn't be getting better in my 60s. I'm better in my 60s because of this.